Hello friends, in today's video we're going to be talking about a couple of my favorite talismans, and why I think you should be using them. If you saw the thumbnail, then you already know we're going to be talking about the consecutive attack talismans. Regardless of whether you've seen these talismans before, this video contains information that I believe is not common knowledge. So you may learn a thing or two about these absurdly strong talismans. Anyways, let's begin. There are 3 talismans of this kind, and a flask mixture for the wondrous physic. They all do effectively the same thing, but to varying degrees of power. It's pretty straightforward though. The more you attack, the more your damage increases, with 3 different tiers of damage boosts that apply with the more consecutive attacks you do, with the exception of Millicent's prosthesis, which also adds 5 dexterity to your character. These talismans can be located all across the lands between, with the winged sword insignia being located quite early in the game in this cave at the start of Liurnia of the Lakes. The rotten winged sword insignia and Millicent's prosthesis can be obtained by completing Millicent's questline, and depending on the ending you choose, you may get one or the other. Both of these talismans cannot be obtained in one playthrough without somebody dropping the other for you. Although, Millicent's prosthesis can actually be obtained quite early on in the Office Plateau if you progress her questline up to the point where she appears after the Godskin Apostle fight in the Windmill Village. But you have to kill her here to get it early. It's worth it though, I promise. The flask mixture can be obtained in the consecrated snowfield by defeating this Erdtree avatar here. The winged sword insignia and the rotten winged sword insignia cannot be equipped simultaneously. However, either one may be equipped with Millicent's prosthesis, and all of the talismans stack with the flask mixture. Also, friendly reminder that buffs in Elden Ring stack multiplicatively and not additively. I know it sounds pretty dumb to say that the more buffs you have, the more damage you deal, but that's an understatement. This is the reason why you see some Elden Ring videos of people one-shotting bosses. And with these talismans having the same requirements to activate them, there's really no reason not to stack them. If you don't believe me, let's move on to the showcase. During this segment, I'll be showcasing fights against multiple late game bosses, both with and without the talismans. For the sake of consistency, I also used a very plain build at level 79 to prove that the damage doesn't come from the stats. During this fight against Godfrey, I want you to pay attention to the damage from this charge attack here. It does 978 damage from the Godskin Peeler, plus 24 with modest stats. Not bad, but not great. But over here, look at the damage from this charge attack once you get cooking with the consecutive attack talismans. 1939 damage is no joke. Quick reminder that this is without setting up any buffs other than the Flask of Wondrous Physic. Maybe that was a fluke. What about a different weapon against a different boss? The Executioner's Sword against Malenia is a much more clear example of how big of a difference these talismans alone make. First, no talismans. And then with talismans. Yeah, it's a pretty big jump in damage for only using a few buffs that work passively.
But Digi, you're only showing weapons that attack fast. These talismans wouldn't work on a colossal weapon.
Well, it's true that it wouldn't be as efficient to use a slower weapon, but these talismans are a little bit more universal than you think. Even against Radagon, a notoriously fast boss, I managed to keep the buff active for a pretty large portion of the fight. And it also gets mileage in other areas you might not expect. With the Eruption Ashavor leaving fire on the ground to deal damage over time, that damage over time is also buffed by the consecutive attack talismans. There's a fair few other interactions like this too, not just with Eruption. Now that I have your attention, let's move on to the more interesting aspects of the talismans that aren't so obvious to the untrained eye. By the Elden Ring Wiki's definition, the consecutive attack talismans increases attack power relative to the number of attacks you land, has 3 tiers of attack power increase, tiers decay to lower tiers when not attacking fast enough, effect activated after 3 hits regardless of weapon class. It's mostly right, except for that last part. Did you know that charge attacks activate the talismans faster than light attacks? Furthermore, weapons with multi-hitting charge attacks have incredible synergy. Take the Twin Blades for example. They have a charge attack that hits 4 times, and the second hit of the 4-hit combo activates the talisman, where the light attacks only activate on the first hit of the second input. This extends to every other weapon class in the game, and applies to weapons that have unique charge attacks, like the Warhawk Talon, the Godskin Stitcher, and Rudgir's Rapier, just to name a few. I think it goes without saying that there's obvious synergy there with both the Axe Talisman and the charge attack boosting Flask Mixture. My personal favorite example of this setup is the Iron Balls and the Starfist. They have probably the fastest attacking charge attack in the game, with substantial poise damage to boot. This is a fight against Radabeast with this setup. No outside buffs from Flame Grant Me Strength, Exalted Flesh, or Golden Vow. Just a raw build. I also used Cragblade for a bit of extra damage. The bonus poise damage wasn't necessary, but it definitely helps. This build rewards aggressive playstyles with multi-hit charge attacks by boosting your damage with consecutive attacks and increasing opportunities for poise breaks. It's not quite one-shot build levels of strong, but for damage this impressive, with just the Wondrous Physic and a couple talismans with modest stats, you can't be mad. Even against Elden Beast, this build mops him up pretty quickly with an early stagger that lets you beat on him for a while before riposting. With just one more buff, or even slightly better stats, defeating Elden Beast before he can even swim away is suddenly very doable, something that isn't common among many builds. This is just how well these talismans synergize to produce an insane amount of damage. And I never see anybody trying to combine them, both the consecutive attack boosting talismans and the charge attack boosting ones. Of course, charge attacks aren't the only thing that activate the consecutive attack talismans in 2 hits. There's Ashes of War too. Some Ashes of War activate in fewer than 3 hits, and some don't activate the talismans at all. Now, I could sit here and go through and explain the interactions with every single Ash of War, but there's way too many of them to go through, including the unique Ashes of War. Finally, let's talk about the weird quirks of this talisman that don't make much sense. Even in terms of light attacks, not all weapon classes activate the talismans in 3 hits. There's actually a few anomalies. Daggers take 4 hits to activate the talisman with light attacks, unless you're dual wielding them, in which case it takes the normal 3 hits. Bare Fists also take 4 hits to activate with light attacks. The Star Scourge Greatswords take 2 hits to activate the talisman while dual wielding, but the normal 3 hits while using one sword. If none of this makes sense, then wait till you hear this part. The Darkmoon Greatsword activates the talisman in 2 hits while one-handing the weapon, but it activates in 3 hits while two-handing it. And the Godslayer Greatsword is the only colossal sword that always activates in 2 hits. One more thing to note is that the talismans seem to reactivate more easily in combat once it's been activated before. The implication is that there's a hidden stat, kinda like poise working behind the scenes. But more similar to status buildup. Instead of inflicting a status though, it's buffing your damage once it reaches the 3 different thresholds. Yeah, there's a lot of weird stipulations to these talismans, and honestly, I'm not sure if these are bugs, but they're in the game right now nonetheless. There's probably much smarter people than myself who can data mine the game and figure out how the talismans truly work, but I'm working with what I've got. Oh, I guess I should mention magic too. Most magic in the game cannot activate the talismans at all, but they can receive the buffs from the talismans still. These spells activate the talismans at varying speeds, and whether you think it's worth using them based off this information is completely up to you. If you're still here at this point, I'd like to thank you for watching all the way through. This is my first time making a video from scratch with a full script, and a lot of work went into making this video. If you liked it and want to see more videos in this style, leave a comment and a like. If you'd like to keep up with my videos, then make sure to subscribe and check me out on Twitch. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.